We're about to do another videotape interview for the Jazz Archives at Hamilton College. We're very fortunate today to have with us Mona Hinton, who is the mother of all the jazz musicians in the USA. She's married to Milt and very much acts the part and is the perfect musician's wife. It's a joy indeed to have her here representing all those great musicians' wives. Mona, how are you today?
I'm doing fine.
You're doing fine.
Doing fine.
Okay. And you're being honored here at the Scottsdale Jazz Party,
yes,
as the Paradise Valley, that is. Mm-hmm. And you are being honored, as was Milt some years ago. And I guarantee that's the only husband and wife team that will ever be honored at jazz, right?
Yes, well, I must preface this. That's the reason I'm wearing my sweatshirt today that was specially designed for me. I think this is the 18th party that Don and Sue Miller have given, and each year they've always honored a male musician. And I'm very happy to say that I am the first non-musician and the first female to be honored at this party, so I think it's quite an honor.
You have a lovely daughter and a granddaughter whom I know you idolize, Inez.
Yes.
And I'm not going to ask you how she is, because that would mean that we'd use the rest of the tape listening to stories about Inez, but I hope she's well.
She's doing fine.
Tell us what it's like to be the wife of a jazz musician, the most popular one of all besides.
Well, I must say that the good Lord has been very good to us. Milt and I have been together over 50 years, and I must tell you that all the young wives, not all of them, but many of the young wives and the young musician insist that they're going to start what you call a 101. That's a survey course that you take when you start to college, but this is going to be the 101 Mona Hinton course, which will enlighten them and kind of clue them into a lot of little things that you should know when you start out on the road. Fortunately, in the early 50s, I used to work in Chicago, and they had this famous hotel there, the DuSable Hotel, and I worked there, and gave me an opportunity to meet a lot of the musicians. So I go back a long way, and as I say, it's just been beautiful. I mean, I've had a chance to meet all the musicians, Milton. All the years that I was traveling with Milton with Cab Calloway's band, I was the only female who traveled all the time, and I was like the den mother. I used to save the money. Those who would drink and couldn't handle it, I'd take their money away from them at night, and then when they got sober the next morning, I would return it to them. And so as I said, I was just considered the den mother, and down through the years, I've had this great opportunity to meet many, many, many families, and I have extended families all over the world. As a result, I mean, of just being Milt Hinton's wife. So I don't know what else you...
Tell me, of the early days, when you traveled with the Calloway band, there were some problems, weren't there? Racial problems.
Oh yes, big problems.
Tell us about those.
Well, unfortunately, due to the climate of our society, that we had the blacks and the whites were segregated. And it made it very difficult, especially when we were traveling in the South, because frequently we would run into Glenn Miller's band or Tommy Dorsey's band or some of the well-known white bands. They were staying in nice hotels, and unfortunately the black musician would have to stay on the other side of the track, usually in someone's home or in a hotel that was not very good. And as I say, unfortunately, frequently the owners of the hotels, they would take advantage, of the black musician. They knew that we could not stay in places, and that you'd run into places with rats and with the roaches and the bed bugs and whatnot. But so under those circumstances, it was not good. Frequently, we would go in towns, and I would have to go out in the black community and try to help find rooms for the musician in Calloway's band, and sometimes it was the places where we had to eat were just intolerable. And but as I said, we made it.
Didn't Calloway finally get a railroad car?
Well, what Calloway's band would be in the Cotton Club for 6 months, and then they keep that same show in the Cotton Club for 6 months, and then that show would travel for 6 months. And so we would go from here, make all the little stops going down to the south. And that's when he had a Pullman, had this big Pullman with an extra car where all the musicians had their trunks. Milton and I always had, we always had lower 7 berth. But then there was a car next to there, and you had your trunks, so you could just go and open your trunks were open, you could get dressed and go out, because that way it alleviated the necessity of having to try to find places to stay. And we would go to California, usually in the Pullman, and then coming back. Well, I must say, Cab had his big automobile, and the car, and the Pullman. It was really nice. And then coming back, he would hire a Greyhound bus, a very nice bus. We were fortunate that we never had to travel in cars like most of the other musicians in those days. They had to pile in automobiles, but Calloway was first class all the way. He was always first class. And coming back, we would have a bus, and we usually keep the same driver, the same bus, and work our way back down through the South and back to New York. And it's kind of funny that we had this one bus driver for quite a long time, and instead of sleeping when he was supposed to be sleeping while the band was playing, he would be partying. So it was my job. I'd have to sit up in the seat right behind him and keep him awake till daybreak. And then Mr. Wright, who was the road manager, then he'd come and he would sit up there with him, and then I could go take a nap. But it was fun. It was really fun. As I say, and I was always the only female traveling with the band all the time, so I was the den mother.
What other stories do you remember about those days with the Cab Calloway band? It must have been lots with the characters that were in that band.
Yes, but you see, when I first started traveling with Milton, he said, "You're going to be the only female here, and the wives come out on occasion." And he said, "And if I ever hear you say that much about what husbands are doing on the road," he said, "I'm going to cut your tongue out." And I believed him. So I never, and quite naturally, the wives would come out and they try to pick me and find out what their husbands have been doing, but they never got anything out of me.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful.
Yeah.
Well, let's see. You did you have favorite musicians? You must have. I know that Ben Webster was one that's held in high regard by your husband, anyway.
Yeah, well, Ben was one of I did have favorites. Tell us who the
favorites were.
I don't remember.
Oh, yes, you do, Mona.
I don't remember. Ben was Ben stayed at our house on occasion.
I see.
And he was such a great talent, and it was unfortunate that Milton was working for Scale, and but Ben, as I say, he was a great talent, but he never felt that he could work for Scale, and so consequently he didn't work a lot of times.
Yeah.
And I think I had a great influence on Ben before he left the United States to go to Europe to live, because I sat him down one day and explained to him, my daughter's going to school, and Milton's working, fulfilling his obligations. I'm working, fulfilling my obligations. And Ben, you have an obligation to fulfill because God gave you a great talent.
Yeah.
And it was so cute that about 2 days later he came back and he brought a bank book to show me that he was really going to try, to save some money and try to get himself together. But it was difficult. He was such a great talent, and I can understand that he would see a lot of the white musicians who were not nearly as talented as he was, and they were getting names, and getting records made, and being put in up on a higher planet, not a planet, but anyway, on a higher place, plane, and he resented this, and he couldn't handle it. And I found that was true with a lot of the black musicians who were
Yeah.
really qualified, but they could never get any place.
Wasn't Doc Cheatham in that band too?
Doc was in the band. Doc had left the band when I
Oh.
was there because Dizzy was there when
I know
joined
Dizzy
the band.
was.
Yeah, and if I'm not mistaken, I think Dizzy replaced Doc. I'm not sure. Don't quote me, but I think.
Now, I
that's what it
understand
was.
Dizzy and Cab had an altercation. Can you tell us that story?
Well, it seemed that they had a little group called what was the name of the Cab Jivers, and they would come out and perform. And Dizzy and I really should let Milton tell that story because he knows the details of it more. But I can remember because a spitball fell in the spotlight, and Cab accused Dizzy of throwing the spitball, and Dizzy was always doing something wrong, but this is one time he was right. He really hadn't thrown the spitball, and I'm not going to go into detail to explain who did throw it because he never admitted that he threw it, but everyone knew who it was. But yeah, and Cab and Dizzy had this little scuffle, and Dizzy stuck his knife in Cab's leg, and I think Milton broke it up, and then Benny Payne and Chew Berry and some of the others came, and as Milton called them, the pachyderms. They came and broke it up. But Cab and Dizzy, they became friends. I mean, they didn't hold grudges for a long time. But as I say, I should let Milton tell that story because he knows Milton's the great storyteller anyways.
I know. Well, we intend to get Milton in this series, don't worry, but what we would like to do is have Joe Williams do it.
Oh.
Because Joe and Milton, I've heard them together, and they're unbelievable.
Well, they
the
go
stories
back.
they tell.
Yeah, they go back a long time from when they were youngsters in Chicago.
Right. That's right.
Mm-hmm.
That's right.
Yeah.
And one of the things that we're doing in this series initially is we're trying to develop some history of the Basie band. Now, two things occur to me. First, the area in which you live is the same area that Basie lived in, right?
We lived right around the corner from each other before they moved down to Freeport.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And don't a number of musicians live in that area?
Oh, at one time we had oodles of them. Well, Illinois Jacket and Wild Bill Davis still live near there, but we had Lena Horne lived there, and Ella Fitzgerald, and oh gosh, who else? What's his name? James Brown moved there later. Cootie Williams. I can't remember all that. There was Jackie. I remember Jackie Robinson and Roy Campanella lived right down the street from us. I know I'm going to miss somebody, but
Did you ever have a jam session in the middle of the street?
No, no, because everyone was going his different ways.
Sure.
It's probably seldom that they were ever home at the same time.
Now, am I correct that you are involved with we're involved with the Basie estate?
Yes, I'm the co-executive of Basie's estate and his wife's estate, and the co-guardian of his daughter Diane.
His daughter's still in a home.
No, we have a home for her in Hollywood, Florida.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. So now she has her own home. She lived in, they had moved to Freeport down in the Bahamas for about 13 years before they died. So now Diane's back in the States and she's down in Florida.
Now tell me about the picture that is now making the rounds of all the musicians. You gave me a copy of that picture some years ago, and now it's in a movie, and you're mentioned as being one of the photographers. Can you tell us about that?
Yes, Esquire wanted that picture. I think it was 1956 or 1958.
57.
57? Mm-hmm. Well, anyway, they had asked all the musicians, contacted lots of musicians who were in New York, and asked them to come to this particular address in front of the brownstone to get this picture for the Esquire magazine. And Milton had two still cameras. He was shooting away, and he had a little 8mm movie camera, and he gave it to me and said, take some footage while the musicians are greeting each other. So that's what I did, and it just so happened that that was the only movie film that was taken that day. So it was very important because they had so many stills, but this way it allowed them to, like animate the still pictures, and so it was very important. So that's how I happened to get in on that.
It's a marvelous picture. Mike, have you seen that picture?
Yeah, yeah.
Would you like to ask Mona a question?
I just wanted to ask you about, Milt has this incredible collection of photos that is like a photo essay on jazz history. And I wanted to ask you about that. As he was taking the pictures and as you saw this compiling, did you realize that you were having that effect on jazz history?
You mean that particular picture?
No, not that single picture, but all the pictures he's taken over the years.
Milton just loved to take pictures. On the road, he and Kig Johnson, his dear friend, used to set up a dark room in the bathroom of the theater or maybe the hotel where we were. And he took hundreds and hundreds of pictures. We never realized they would be that important because half the time he'd throw them in the drawers, and there were some of them where had been taken and not developed for years. And then not only that, we had a couple floods in our basement, and it wiped out a lot of the color photos and a lot of the other pictures, but they were just pictures. I mean, he had never in his wildest dreams ever dreamed that they would become this popular or this important to the history of the music and the climate of our society. I mean, in the United States in general. So I know that you're familiar with the picture for colored entrance and for colored only, but he was just taking pictures. I mean, for no particular reason other than the fact that he liked to be. And he's not really a photographer, I mean, he never studied photography and that type of thing. But
he's better than most who have, though.
Yeah, because he has frequently made the statement, and it's true, that he's been able to get a lot of pictures that the professional photographers couldn't get, because if a professional comes up, that you're going to freeze or pose or something. Well, he was one of the musicians in the studios or wherever they were, so he just snapping away, and I mean, they wouldn't pay him any attention. So that was why he was able to get a lot of pictures that are really very famous now, and the people who eventually became legends in the business.
And catching people in very natural settings.
Exactly. Because I have to tell you a cute story. He used to take pride in catching people asleep. So year before last, on the SS Norway, they had us up so early to get off the ship, and they didn't, and we waited and we waited and we waited. So there was a chaise lounge there, so he crawled up there and went to sleep. I was so tired, I crawled up behind him and I went to sleep. Well, I tell you, they tell me the cameras were clicking like crazy. They finally got us. And I'm telling you, I must have had 20 different photos of the two of us there sound asleep. So they were able to get back at us at that point.
I wanted to ask you about the Basie band. There were obviously some characters in the Basie band, and I was interviewing another one of the people, and I was asking, they were more than just musicians who could play the notes. They were personalities, they were characters. Can you tell us some of the either more funny things that happened or some of the more poignant things that happened in the Basie band amongst the characters?
Well, you see, I don't know. I never traveled with the Basie band. See, Milton was with Calloway for about 15, 16 years. So I was always with the Cab Calloway band. So, but as I said, the Basies and I, we were friends and we were neighbors, and I know frequently, Catherine loved it. They had a beautiful backyard with a Olympic-sized swimming pool and whatnot, and she loved to give parties for a lot of charitable organizations. And I do remember on one occasion that Milton and Bill would come over, I call him Bill, but Basie would come over to our house, and he and Milton would sit in the basement and yak, and we had this old piano, and he played like they used to do in the silent movies and whatnot. And so they were sitting down there one day, and the band didn't show up at Catherine's party. So she came and she said, "Bill, you have to come, you and Hinton," she always called him Hinton, "you and Hinton have to come." And so, well, they weren't too happy about that, but there they are down there playing all these old what do you call that music? Like for the background, for the silent movies.
Yeah.
And he had to drop everything and go running back home to play some music for her garden party. But as I say, so I don't really know too much about what happened on there. I could tell you about the Calloway band.
I was going to say, what about some funny stories and poignant tales about the Calloway group?
I had to tell some that I wouldn't be telling out of school.
Well, we're not going to publicize this.
Oh, whisper and tell me.
Oh, no, I won't do that to you. I won't do that to you.
No, oh gosh. I'd have to think about it.
Well, we'll come back to that in a minute. I want to switch you to another phase of your life that I know is important to you, and that's the work that you do with your church and the Mona Hinton Fund,
Yes.
and the work that's done with that. And the thing that amazes me about that is that you have time to do it.
Well, I tell you,
Could you tell us what the fund is, what the work is?
well, I tell you that we raise this money, and on Saturdays we have at our church, the children from first grade on up through college, up through high school, can come and they introduce them to various well, not occupation, but just various. Well, they are occupations, I guess, and that's not the word I want to use. But anyway, they are tutored, as I say, from first grade through the eighth grade. I mean, through high school, and they have a lot of young black young men who have in various professions, such as computers and attorneys. I mean, in various professions, and what they do is come and they donate their time to these to working with these youngsters, and they're just doing a magnificent job of helping these youngsters. I mean, help to try to further themselves. I mean, improve their improve their way of wanting to live, their methods and their lifestyles, and basically that's what they're doing.
You're
That's
setting
what
an
they're
example.
Exactly, as I say, it's doing an excellent job.
But that operation has your name on it.
Yes, well, they surprised me for my birthday last year and sent out money. Sent out requests to many of my friends all over the world and asked them to make donations toward this endeavor. And they raised a lot of money, and I must say that I was quite pleased to know that they had thought enough of me to do this. I have, I've been very fortunate in as much as, to begin with, that I had the parents that I had. I had a mother and father that had 6 children born in Mississippi, and they moved from Mississippi. They got as far as Central Illinois, where I was born. They stayed there until I was 9 months old. Then we moved to Sandusky, Ohio, which is my home now. But to think that I had parents with very little formal education who said, let's try to get north to give our kids a chance. And that took a lot of guts.
Yeah.
So I think that within itself tells you what my background is. And because my parents always believed in education, and they made it a very, very important part of our lives.
Isn't that Milton's background too?
Yes.
From Mississippi?
Yeah. Yes, he's from Mississippi also.
Yeah.
But you see, Milton's mother and father separated when he was about, I guess, very, very young, just a few months old. This is a cute story that his uncle always tells. Of course, his mother denied it, but she said that when they were married, that his mother cooked some black-eyed peas one day, and his father said, "Oh, gee, these are the most delicious black-eyed peas I've ever tasted." So his mother cooked them every day. And so finally he came home one day and he was tired of black-eyed peas, so he said, gee, baby, I told you that I like black-eyed peas, but do I have to eat them every day? So his uncle says that was the last time he saw Milton's father. He was running down the road in a blaze of glory, because in those days they had the kerosene lamps, and she took him through the lamp with him. I know it's probably a story, but anyway, it's a cute story. He said,
Yeah.
So that's the last. So Milton he didn't see his son again until Milton must have been in his early 30s. And just by accident, Milton ran into him in Memphis, Tennessee.
Oh,
But
really?
he never saw his father from that day until, as I say, till he's about 30-some years old.
I'll be darned. Huh.
But,
No.
but I was just saying, you know, that I was so fortunate to have the parents that I
Yes,
did, and
yes.
I think that within itself says a lot about how I feel about education. And you see, I went back to school for many, many years. I did not see the necessity of matriculating. Every time I would feel mentally stagnant, I would just go take a course at Hunter or the new I don't think they had the new school then, but any school downtown. And I loved anthropology. I took a lot of courses in that. I loved psychology, and I took a lot of courses in that. Anything that I felt like that I wanted to do. So it was not until later years that one of the teachers at Queens College talked me into matriculating. And I'm glad he did, because when I did graduate, I graduated magna cum laude, and for an old lady, that was pretty good.
Marvelous. How much time do you spend on the road now? What
Too
percentage?
much.
Yeah, I know that, but what percentage of your time? I know I talked to you the other day, and you were just back from Hilton Head, and here you are in Phoenix, and I suppose you're going to the gig at Palm Beach,
Yeah.
and the
in
gig
St.
at
Louis.
Sarasota.
In St. Louis, and we had just left Wilmington. And I tell you what, I've been trying to cut back because, as you know, I haven't been too well.
I know that.
But my doctor has encouraged me to go as much as I can, because this way, wherever I am, I can rest, and I can get my meals proper meals, and then it still allows Milton to play his music and to do his workshops and his clinics and all the things that are required of him to keep him going. So it's worked out pretty good, except that I think that we took on a little too much this year. But I mean, we've been on the road as much as 200 days out of a year.
That's a lot.
Yeah. But Milton thrives on it, and as I said, we've been together over more than, at least 55 years, and it's very important for him to do this. See, Milton believes he's never going to die. He says that he's going to live forever, and I believe him. That's been his basic philosophy, that as long as he shares his talents and his knowledge with young people, and those young people continue to carry it on, in that case, in that way, he said he'll never die. And he has really spent his lifetime trying to not really be a role model, he's just being Milton. But in the end, that's eventually what he is. To show these young people that you can work with your church, with the Boy Scouts, you can be the best musician in the world, and you can make it. So, and I'm very fortunate, to have been able to work with Milton. We've been able to work together. Milton's never wanted to be a band leader. He never wanted to have a lot of money. He believes that money is to be spent to be used for the good, for somebody's good. And I go along with him along those lines. So there's many a youngster that has come through the years that have in later years, they have really shown us their appreciation for some of the things that we did to them. Some of them laugh about how I used to put on a big pot of chicken wings or a big pot of red beans and rice. And if you ever see Richard Davis, the bass player, that's the first thing he can say, "Oh, Mona makes the best chicken wings in the whole wide world." But you made a big pot and it stretch it.
Sure.
And we have the basement, and the kids call it the cave. And anytime they would come, sometime they would want to, didn't have money, for a place to stay. Well, they could always stay down there as long as they behaved themselves. And so, as I said, we've been very fortunate like that in order to help a lot of the youngsters.
Yeah. Well, you have a long list of them, I know. Did Charlotte ever travel with the band?
No.
You stayed home with her?
Well, you see, what happened was we traveled, and then when Charlotte was born, Milton came home and went in the recording studios.
Yeah, okay.
So while he went on the road to Japan with Louis Armstrong in '53, I believe it was, and he came back and he said, "Here, Milton has studied with the best teachers in the whole wide world, and really became very proficient on his instrument." And But he could not stand to stay in that band and just play the same music day in and day out. It was killing him.
Yeah.
So he said he wasn't going on the road with Louis anymore. Well, Joe Glazer was his manager at the time, and Joe said, and they're not talking to each other. They're talking to me, and I'm talking. You know, I'm the go-between. So he says, Milton said, no, I'm going to stay home because my daughter's growing up, and she's calling everybody daddy but me. So Joe says, well, I tell you what, I will send Mona. Tell him that if he will go on the road with Louis, I will send a tutor. Send you and Charlotte and a tutor. So Milton says, well, he could send a tutor for Mona, for Charlotte, for Milton, anybody else he wants. I'm not going on the road again and play that same music over and over again. But they finally worked it out. But
yeah, Louis' show was pretty cut and dried, wasn't it?
oh yes, they played those same tunes day in and day out. He was such a remarkable man, though. And Milton would have loved to continue to work with him, but he
Well, he loved Louis, I know.
Oh yes,
Yeah.
but he just, I mean, musically he was killing himself.
Yeah.
So then when he was in the recording studios. See, that's when we stayed home all those years.
Yeah.
On occasion he would go out with somebody, but most of the time he stayed home.
Do you know any good stories about Louis that we haven't heard?
No, not really. He was a nice person.
Well, didn't he live in the same neighborhood?
Not too far from us. He lived closer to LaGuardia Airport than we did. But, and you know, to the day he died, he would never call me anything but Mrs. Hinton. I used to say, Pops, it's embarrassing. You call all the other wives by their first names. And one day he said to me, and I said, why? You know, it's embarrassing to me that you always say Mrs. Hinton. He says, it was that gravel voice. He said, yeah, but baby, you're a lady. I can't call you anything but Mrs. Hinton. And this was typical of him, you know.
Yeah.
I want to ask you a question about him because I was teaching about him in my history of jazz class. Tell us about his tone.
His what?
His tone.
On the trumpet?
Yeah, they say he had this huge tone, and it was like a signature. You could hear him play just a few notes, and you knew that was him.
Oh, sure. Well, that's true. But you know, that's the secret of being. That's the secret that most musicians should have, because the minute that I hear Milton playing, we'll get back to Louis, but I have to tell you this: the minute that I hear something, I can almost tell you that's Milton Hinton playing. You know why? Because if you notice. See, Milton pushed that 16-piece to 17-piece band all those years with Calloway with nothing but a little microphone, you know. So when you hear, you notice it. When you hear him, you hear that solid beat.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Whereas and you don't hear it in any other musician. Even the bass players along that time, as I say. So that's it's like your signature. The minute you hear Teddy Wilson, something, that's Teddy Wilson. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But if somebody who is mimicking Teddy, you don't know who the devil they are. And that's what it was with Louis. I mean, he had the quality of his tone or whatever I don't know the exact precise word to use for it, but the minute you heard it, you know that was Louis Armstrong. See what I say? And that's really what all musicians should strive.
Well, all the great musicians, you can say it. Just this morning, I was standing outside the room and I heard a sound, and I said, that's got to be Buddy Tate.
That's right. That's right.
There's nobody who plays
That's
the
right.
sax like Buddy Tate.
So that's what pretty much, you know, why everyone recognized Louis, because that was his signature.
But I think Milt has a tone too. I can flip on the radio and hear somebody playing, and I'll say, that's Milt on the bass.
Yeah, that's the way it is with me.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Well, you know it better than I do.
Can I ask you about some of the early days? You know, Milt is probably the most revered bass player living today. Can you tell us that time when you felt like he had really established himself? Or what were some mile markers? Because I spent some time with Dizzy, and he told me of a little time. I asked him, when did you think you had made it? And he told me, this is when I thought I was there. Can you tell us a time like that about Milt?
I don't think so, because he's still striving. I don't know whether he feels that he has reached that point yet or not. I really don't. Yeah.
He doesn't.
Huh?
I think you're
I
right.
don't think he does. I think he's because as he says, every time he plays, I mean, you know, he gives it the best shot that he can, and I think he still does that. So I don't really know if he ever feels that he has really made it.
I didn't mean that to say in a way that he would relax and say, "Oh, I'm there. I don't have to work anymore." But when he began to get some feedback from other musicians that, "Hey, you're doing it."
Oh, well, I think he got that always in the Calloway band, and then I tell you what happened. He came to New York after he left, Calloway's band, and he was walking down the street one day, and he ran into Jackie Gleason and his manager Bullock, and so Milton knew Jackie when he was. When only the musicians were laughing at his jokes, when they used to buy him a drink. So, but he, as I said, the day that he ran into Milton, he said to Milton, "What are you doing?" And Milton says, "Well, I'm looking for a job." I mean, Milt was just freelancing a little bit around here because he'd just come off the road. And so Jackie said to Bullock, he said, "We have a record date tomorrow with Bobby Hackett." And so he said, "Let's get Milt." The Bullock said, "Well, you already have a bass player." He said, "Well, now we've got two." And he hired Milton to do that record date. Well, consequently, no black musician were recording in those days like that. And but when he went in, the A&R man and the conductor and everyone saw that Milton was qualified. And the contractor came over and got his name and address and went, "How can I contact you if I need you?" And that's how he became involved, because he was qualified. You see, it didn't make any difference whenever a contractor would call. It could be you never ask who it was for. They would call and say, "Is Mr. Hinton free at 10 o'clock on Tuesday," or whatever it is. And I'd had an appointment book, and yes, he's free. We'll have him at RCA Victor or Capitol or Columbia or studio such and such a time. Now, when he left home, he didn't know whether it was the rock and roll, whether it was with Stravinsky, whether it was with Barbra Streisand. He didn't know who it was for. Guy Lombardo, it could be anybody. And these are the people that he just went there. They put the music up there, and he had to be on time. He said that not looking for a place to park or not adjusting your strings. When that conductor's baton came down across his nose, you were there to hit that first note. And so Milton believes in punctuality. But these are the things that got him started. And once they knew that he was qualified, he could read anything, play anything, and so he started getting more work than he could handle. And then for a long time, O.C. Johnson, the drummer, Barry Galbraith, the guitar player, Hank Jones, the piano player, and Milton, they would do at least 3 sessions a day, 10 to 1, 2 to 5, and 7 to 8 every day. They were called the New York, what do they call them, the New York rhythm section. And they did that for years. But as I say, that's because they were all qualified, and they didn't have to ask you, can you play this or that. It's an interesting thing. What's his name? Willie Nelson? Milton just did a date with him last year. He always wanted to do a date with Milton, and Milton did it. I can't tell you the name of it. But you see, Milton made his first recording date in 1930. And he has worked with every group of musicians, every generation, from that day up to the present day. Well, as a matter of fact, 2 weeks ago, he did the soundtrack for, what is it, Clockers? That's the, what's his name? Lee. Bill Lee's son, the movie guy.
Spike?
Spike, I couldn't think of his name. He just did the soundtrack for Spike's new movie, Clockers, I think is the name of it. So since 1930, he has worked with every musician. And I must tell you an interesting story about Quincy. For Milton's 80th birthday, I think it was, he sent a homemade videotape to the house. And he's had somebody take it, and he's standing there with this envelope and piece of paper, and he said, "Bring the camera up. I want you to be sure and see that this is the Milton, to see that this is his handwriting and this is his torn check." And he tells a story on the tape, saying that on his first recording date that any company allowed him to do under his own name. I don't know whether the copyist messed up the music, but anyway, the date had to go into overtime. The company held him responsible for the overtime. Here's a young kid, his first recording date under his own name, didn't have a dime. And so, but anyway, he said he borrowed and stole and got hold of the money. He paid every musician the money that was due them. And he said, you know that every musician took that money except you, Milton. He said, and here's you. He reads the letter, he shows Milton the letter that Milton returned to him, and Milton evidently had torn the check and put it in the letter. And he said, and here's this torn check. He said, I have had this all these years in the front of my date book. And he said, every day that God allows me to get up, I look at this and keep reminding me what some of my responsibilities are to other young people. Now, I think that's a great tribute, but that's really basically the way Milton has always lived. I mean, if he can't, always trying to help, promote the young people and try to encourage them and whatnot. And I think that's the best example of what I'm saying. And I think it's a great honor that Quincy would keep that all these years. And that was one part of his birthday present to Milton. I think on his 80th birthday, if I'm not sure. But
I think there's a tremendous message in that.
Oh, it's a great story
for musicians,
yeah.
Young musicians today who are hungry for the trappings without affording each other the camaraderie and support.
Right.
That's what the music is really about. Am I right?
That's right. So, I've been very fortunate. In the beginning, when Milton and I first got together, I used to think that he allowed people to take advantage of him. And boy, I'm telling you, I didn't like that, and I would speak my mind.
You stop that, kid.
But I tell you, one day he said to me, he said, I have to tell you something. He said, when I do something, I do it from my heart. And he said that, and I don't feel that anybody's taking advantage of me. If I do something, if someone wants to take that and misuse it or use it in a negative way, he said, I have nothing to do with it. That's between them and their God. I've done what I think is right. And I think it took me a long time to understand that, but I think I'm a much better person once I start following, thinking along those lines like he did. And but it's true. I mean, you do what you think is right, and if someone wants to misuse it, you have nothing to do with it. You've done your part. So.
Beautiful.
Well, Mona, we're coming up on 5:30. That's an hour. And we've enjoyed it. The nice things about the stories you tell about Milt is that those of us who know you both know that he couldn't be what he is without you.
Yeah, I had to tell you something about, I've been knowing Joe for many years too, and Jolene. She's a lovely person.
Yes.
But one of the nicest renditions I think that I remember of Joe Williams is at the White House for Duke Ellington's 70th birthday that they had there.
Yeah.
And Lou Rawls and Billy Eckstein and Joe did a trio. And it was fabulous. If you ever get a chance, you should see some of the
He
pictures.
and Billy Eckstein were great friends.
Yes, uh-huh.
He was really smashed when Billy passed.
Yeah.
But,
Yes, so, we go back many, many years.
yeah. Well, you're wonderful people, and we sure appreciate your taking the time to come over here. You have done a wonderful job representing the ladies of the music world, and thank God there's you, because you're the best.
Well,
Thanks a lot.
I'm the den mother.
That's right.
You're welcome.